This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by Jackson Flickinger and Corey Walsh, and the Cleveland Cavaliers are ready to open up their 24-25 NBA campaign against the Toronto Raptors on Wednesday night. And since we have a brand new season ahead of us, now is the perfect time to lock in some of our final predictions and set the stage for what's about to come next. Before we get into today's preview, let me remind everyone that you can find the Junkyard Pod on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. If you want to support us in any way, then all you have to do is hit subscribe and follow us on all of those platforms. Drop a like, leave a rating, do it all because it all really helps and we appreciate it. Lastly, if you prefer to get your Cavs news in written format, then make sure you're tuned into everything going on at Fear the Sword. Jackson has all of us doing great work on the blog, and you'll find coverage there all throughout the season, as well as links to our live watch parties on Playback TV, where you can watch the Cavs along with us. Jackson and Corey will be hosting the opening night game on Wednesday, so definitely check that out. And now that all the plugs are out of the way, let's get into today's preview. And we can just start off by, how is everyone feeling now that the NBA season is back and the Cavs are right around the corner?
I'm feeling pretty good. It feels good to actually be watching new basketball, just to be breaking down new basketball. It's just great to actually be able to really do that instead of like watching a preseason game and thinking, maybe like, how does this translate? Or like, as you've been doing, Tony, breaking down Nets footage from 2016. It's nice to not have to do that anymore. We will have real basketball to look at and talk about. So I am excited.
Yeah, the funny thing with basketball is I feel like maybe around like February or March, you always kind of look forward to the off season where the draft and free agency period, because that's like when all of the hypotheticals and the narratives that were discussed since basically tip off of the new season kind of come into play. But then you realize how boring it is when you're not watching actual basketball. And instead it's just the talking heads talking about, well, this could happen. This could be what it looks like. And at the end of the day, we get to see finally what the pen looks like when it hits paper, like our opening night tonight. The two most hyped up teams in the East going head to head, and immediately became clear that Karl-Anthony Towns was not going to have a fun night as he got attacked and dropped coverage three times.
This could age very badly. We are recording.
I'm willing to let it fly.
Game, so Corey's being bold with the opening takes, but I love it.
But when Karl-Anthony Towns hits the game winner at the end of the game, who's going to be laughing?
I mean, everyone looks bad. Every center looks bad against the Celtics, so that's kind of their thing, right?
Not center Mobley, dude. You remember that one game?
That was come on. I will say, if we're getting takes off after the first couple minutes, the Celtics look great, but Al Horford looks old. He's getting turned. He's just getting blown by every possession. Doesn't seem to matter so far, but we'll see. Sometimes it takes the older guys a little while to get their legs back. So I'm not going to overreact, but I did notice that he
sounds like that's what you're doing. But
it sounds like you.
Well,
hate
that's
Al
what
Horford.
we're doing. But I'm just saying that it is. I don't hate him, but the guy. Pretty old now.
I don't know if the Celtics went into this season being like, God, I hope Al Horford plays center for us on opening night. It was kind of like, gee, I hope we thought of replacements.
Yeah. Get your Luke Cornett stock now, because I've heard that we're going to the moon.
Oh, well, you could almost reach it already, so we'll see.
True.
I was told this was a Cavs podcast.
I was about to transition us back.
Okay.
Jackson, before we started recording, you were saying you want us to, to go back and forth and talk a little more. I think you're just a professional hater, and I respect it.
Thank you. I mean, I am a professional hater when it comes to like the Celtics and Knicks. So
we took it.
There's only so much I can talk about the Celtics and Knicks without. Yeah,
that's fair. So let's bring it back to the Cavs, and I will say, I agree with what you guys were saying. The offseason can be very boring, and I'm ready to not be looking at preseason footage or Kenny Atkinson Nets offensive sets or anything like that. I will say this summer was a lot easier with the Olympics and the WNBA and even the Guardians going deep into the playoffs. It made the offseason a little smoother than it normally is, but I'm ready to finally get some new stuff to talk about. And so I want to start by putting our little preview and getting everything into context, because as many of you know, we exist within the context of everything that came before us. So keeping last season in mind, Jackson, what's one thing that you hope translates for the Cavs from last year and one thing you hope changes?
Well, I do hope the defense actually does translate. I know that we have complained fairly frequently about the Cavs' three-point defense, their willingness to, I guess, their insistence on, protecting the paint at all costs. But really, that works out well for 82 games, throughout a regular season. And I just hope that continues, because for like a regular season, day-by-day basis, the offensive improvements aren't going to help nearly as much if like the defense isn't, there every single night. That's what's been keeping the Cavs in games for the last 2 seasons. That's what's going to be keeping them in games in the future. So if they are going to have as good of a regular season as we think, the defense needs to be there.
Yeah, that's actually the same thing that I would say, is that I hope the defense is going to translate. It looked a little shaky in preseason. Of course, none of that, we'll see if any of that even matters. But, defense has been their identity. That's where they need to dominate, in my opinion. And really, I think the answer to this for me is very simple. I hope that the defense translates, and I hope the offense gets better. Corey, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I also had defense, more in the sense that I feel like if you keep the same group together and the defense drastically changes from one season to another, then you can tell this was definitely like a philosophy shift within the coaching staff. And with all the offensive propaganda that we've been having with Kenny Atkinson, how he's going to revolutionize the offense. If that means that the team's identity from the prior seasons goes away and necessarily that offense doesn't hit, then you kind of don't have a team with any semblance of an identity, and that's a bigger problem. It would make more sense if there was a defensive drop-off, if key players like Allen was traded during the offseason, but just the fact that they made this really concerted effort to keep everyone in-house, if that dropped off, that would be a big problem, in my opinion. And what I had for something that I hope comes with this season is kind of just the roster feeling less redundant. I felt like at times we kind of felt like there was too much overlap between, you kind of felt like you had 2 non-shooting bigs between Evan and Jarrett, and the Evan's development takes another step. You hopefully feel that like that redundancy and inability to share the floor together, kind of that those worries kind of simmer away as we enter like the latter halves of the season. And then also just the redundancy between Darius and Donovan as well. And that's not even saying that their skill sets are identical. It's just the way that they were being used, with their Darius not necessarily being the best coming off ball. We're kind of hoping he creates more opportunities with himself when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, without corner shooting, more willingness to kind of fire away in different shooting scenarios. And then Donovan, I kind of just feel like Donovan needs to stay the same. When I say the redundancy, it's more that Darius needs kind of like stray away from only being able to convert on his attempts when he's on ball. So any opportunity that the staff can have to kind of diversify the looks that those 4 get, so you don't necessarily feel like you can only play 2 at a time, would be a huge step forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one take that I've been kind of cooking up for a video on Darius Garland recently that I'm going to workshop here in real time is that I think one of the interesting things about DG is that when he's at his best and who he is at his core, I think is basically a traditional point guard, like a pass first player. And when he's at his best, it's when he's getting everyone else involved and rolling. And that's where in that first All-Star season where he's playing without Donovan Mitchell, and really he's kind of like the only player on the court who could create a shot for himself, he would get so much defensive attention that kind of, in a weird way, opened the game for him, because now he's able to manipulate the defense and kind of bend them to his will. Now that Mitchell's there, and now that teams have started to adjust, his role has changed a little bit to where they don't need, they do need him to have the ball in his hands and to be that point guard and floor general, but he's being asked to score more in these big games and big moments where teams are kind of taking Mitchell off the board and really just daring Darius Garland to beat them in drop coverage, or that's in between game, finishing at the rim, or just shooting pull-up threes like we saw it against Orlando and in the Boston series. There's just been these moments that are basically calling for him to up his usage and assert himself a little more offensively, and he hasn't really done that. And I think it's because he's kind of battling who he is at his core of being a pass-first player, and he's still trying to find that balance of like, all right, this is the time when I need to get everyone else involved, and this is the time where the defense is daring me to beat them, and I have to make them pay. And I think that's where, if you're trying to get rid of some of that redundancy, finding the balance between that is the key.
Well, it all comes back to, I keep going back to that article that you wrote for Free the Sword in like June, something like that, where you talked about how Darius just needs to, no matter what context he's in, he can't continue to be the same player and be like the best version of himself. He needs to be way more comfortable moving off ball. He needs to be able to kind of like produce that own energy within himself and within the offense. And I think I always keep going back to that Ricky Rubio year, the time that they were together on the court. And one of the things that Rubio really brought is his willingness to pass, his willingness to move is really infectious. And you could see that rubbing off on Darius, and you could see that bringing out the very best version of Garland. And we haven't really seen that same way with Mitchell. And I know that Mitchell's a very different player. He dominates the ball, and you have the whole lineup doesn't really, lend itself to that kind of energy, because if two guys aren't really able to dribble, or at least, haven't been able to dribble in the past, and if you throw an Okoro, that's three, you just can't really play that same way. So I think it's one of those things where Garland needs to improve, but kind of the context around him needs to improve as well. And that's where you'd like to see just that more pace that Atkinson has been consistently talking about. It should help him. And that's one of the things that it's easy to get locked in on Mobley, but the Cavs had a really good season last year, despite Garland being pretty bad when he was on the court. So we know that he doesn't have to be that type of player. It's just whether he can take the step into being the very best version of himself.
Yeah, I feel like Darius kind of toes this line where he can get tunnel vision in one of those two aspects, and never feels like he ever can find that perfect balance, like Tony was saying. I do think ideally he would rather be the facilitator than be the one who needs to be the scorer on the team. I mean, it's been a common criticism of his shooting mentality for like now 3+ seasons. Even in his best season, we were kind of saying he's doing great, but he could still get more attempts up, even on an offense that was kind of living and dying with every shot Darius had at the time. Kind of felt like towards that play-in run, it was all on Darius's shoulders if the Cavs were going to win or lose every game they played. If Darius is in a great position to kind of find that balance, because it's not necessarily that the Cavs are going to go as far as Darius can take them, but they're going to reach the highest ceiling they can if he can kind of rebound and get back to at least the level we saw 2 years ago. It doesn't necessarily need to be all-star Darius Garland for this team to kind of go where it needs to. There's a lot of other players that can help assist in that way, but it's all down to Darius's mentality. And we've seen one coaching staff try to get to him with this. So maybe a different voice in Darius's ear is what it takes.
I think your mic's muted, Jackson.
Yep.
One of the things that with the 3-point shooting volume is that a lot of the attempts that he kind of passes up are all like pull-up shots, and I think that's the sign of a offense that is really stagnant if that's kind of like what you're really relying on. When you think of pull-up shooting, you think of like Luka Doncic, James Harden, guys who are the entire offense themselves, and Darius doesn't want to be that type of player. Like he does still pass up some catch and shoot threes, but he doesn't do it nearly as much, and you'd like to just have him get a lot more easier ones and have him kind of getting downhill and attacking the paint out of situations where he doesn't just dribble it up the court, dribble it 6 times, then get the pick, then start turning the corner. So it's like, that's where you think that Atkinson can really help just put Darius in better positions to be himself.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap up this segment and transition to our next question, I do just want to finish off with Garland and to the point that we're making. I think of that Orlando series and specifically Game 6, where Donovan Mitchell is just putting on an absolute clinic to the point where Orlando is throwing everything they can at him to stop him and to get him off the ball. And there was moments where it was, again, basically just begging Garland to step up and either knock down a pull-up 3 or get into the paint and convert something. And we saw, I don't remember who he was passing to, but I know there was at least 1, maybe even 2 turnovers where he drives into the paint, not looking to shoot, picks up his dribble, and it's a turnover. And that's what I mean when I say, that's a scenario where he has to understand the moment and go get a bucket. Hopefully, under Kenny Atkinson's offense, it won't be as, heliocentric, like Jackson was saying there. There will be a little more synergy between the two of them. So it's not just Mitchell's turn and Garland's turn. And that's my answer to what I hope changes this season, is that I hope the offense gets better, because this is where they have struggled. This has been their downfall to me in the last two playoffs. The offense this year, it has to be in the top 10. That's the whole concept of the core four, is that you get an elite defense because of your two bigs, paired with an elite offense because of the two guards. We've had one thing happen for this Cavs team. It's time for the rest of that to fall into place.
Do you think that the Cavs can be like a top 2 seed in the East if they don't have a top 10 offense?
Honestly, probably not, because they were like 8th the first Donovan Mitchell season, right? But that was kind of like a fraudulent 8th. Like
it was fraudulent.
That offense was not the 8th best in the league, and it got exposed very quickly. But yeah, I would assume like they should be top 10 in offense and defense this year if they're going to be like a top 2 seed in the East, like we think.
Yeah, I think that there is still more. I'm just so in on Dean Wade right now and his fit with the core.
Well, save it. Let me say this for our next topic, then I'll let you go first.
Okay.
Because I want to go ahead and move. Our second big question for the year is, what is going to be the biggest surprise for the Cavs? Which Cavalier is going to surprise people the most? That could be the DG bounce back season. It could be Mobley making the leap. Or does a bench player come out and surprise us? Jackson, take the floor.
Well, it won't be a bench player. It'll be a starter surprising us in Dean Wade.
Yeah.
So please put some respect on his name. I'm just so... Maybe this is just because it's been summer for so long and I haven't been able to watch real basketball. So you just have to, you just talk yourself into things. But I am really, really, really in on Dean Wade. I think that his fit with his defense is so good. And I think it's just really hard to contextualize how good his defense is and how versatile of a defender he is and how well he pairs with Mobley and Allen. And it's like, I think that if you were to go all in on just saying, hey, we're going to have him at the 3 and we are going to just keep yelling at him, begging him to shoot until he finally does actually do it, I think you can just get a decent offense by and you can have the number 1 defense. And I think if your defense is that versatile, you're just going to win so many games. And I think it's like the Minnesota Timberwolves model, where you look at that team from last year. That team had a pretty bad offense. It was just kind of carried by Anthony Edwards and Cat. But the defense was phenomenal because they had defenders at every position. They were really versatile, even though they had, one guy in Cat who's not a great defender, as Corey pointed out earlier today. So I think that you can become like hands down the best defense in the league if you just really commit to this Dean Wade at the 3 thing. And that's where I'm just like, I am all the way in on this.
Listen, maybe it's because I'm just in close proximity to Jackson, but every time I think I'm out on Dean Wade, I get suckered right back into it. I let the record show, as of recording, I am in on Dean Wade, because listen, if Dean Wade played for the Lakers, we'd hear about him nonstop. But because he plays for the Cavs and because he's prone to just running cardio for a few weeks at a time, people are unfamiliar with his game. He just disappears. Let me tell you something. Kenny Atkinson is going to turn Dean Wade into a gunner. You have a 6'9", athletic, versatile defensive wing. He shoots near 40% on three-pointers, but he's just never shoots them. He's just not a volume shooter until now. Kenny is going to push him out of his comfort zone. This is the year that Dean starts taking three-pointers. Jackson's been on top of it, especially with the Strus injury opening up an opportunity for the Wade renaissance. It could happen. Now, let me say just real quick, once and for all, this is it for my Wade fandom. If it doesn't happen, I'm never getting back in. This is it. If he can't establish himself during the first few weeks, then I'm out. But I do think, now this is a bold take, but I do think that there is a chance, maybe a slim chance, that Dean Wade comes out, absolutely balls with the starting 5, and he becomes a full-time starter. And that would make me happy, because then there's a world where Max Strus is your 6th man, and he's not playing small forward, and that just makes a whole lot more sense. And Karis LeVert is playing for another team. So the trickle-down effect would be great. Again, this is my last time. This is the last hurrah. But Dean Wade, I'm with you. And that's my pick for biggest surprise, is that Dean Wade becomes a full-time starter. Corey, are you going to go bold, or are you going to rein us back in and take this a different direction?
I guess I'll rein us back in a little bit, but it's more that I think the biggest common concern you see online from Cavs fans is thinking that this is probably one of the worst benches we've had in decent memory. And I think that's in combination with the fact that little moves were made. So no one gets to be like amazed by a splashy bench move that we made by trading someone away. But coaching makes a huge difference to role players as a whole, and offensive systems being changed is also something that can change the way that role players look. The Cavs role players were not put in great situations last year, not only because of injuries that caused certain players to get thrust into starting roles and shifting around the minutes, but also just because, I mean, that offense, as we've been saying, was static at times. Possessions would start late. Players weren't necessarily set up with their traits. It's kind of like if you had one thing and you weren't doing it right, you looked awful on the floor most times rather than not. I'm not saying that this is going to be that George Niang looks like a solid NBA player. Not going that far. That would be me going too extreme. But it's more just that I think we're going to be kind of surprised with how the players look off the bench. And maybe, who knows? Tony could get his wish, and Karis LeVert looks so good, he might have trade value. We never know.
You never know. We can
no disrespect to Corey, but I absolutely hate this take. I think this take is completely.
I'm so back.
This completely this take. There's no evidence that this take is like really what's holding the Cavs back. You know what's holding the Cavs back? The Cavs have one of the worst starting lineup net ratings over the entire last season. You look at teams that are good, they're all like the teams that are winning championships and stuff. They're about in the +8, +9 area for net rating for their starting units. The Cavs were +2 last year. They're not a good starting team. All of their best basketball came when they were starting 2 or more bench players. All of their best lineups included 2 or more bench players. The bench isn't the issue. We don't like George Niang. We don't like Karis LeVert. They all have flaws. We know that. But they actually fit in, maybe not Yang, but they all fit in pretty well with what the Cavs actually want. And even, honestly, even Yang doesn't fit in, fits in better than people give him credit for. His offense, the offense was consistently better when he was on the court compared to when he was off. And he's a really good screen setter, which is something this team needs. He's actually a pretty good passer. So it's there's reasons why the offense was better when he was on the floor. And this is goes back to my whole point. The starters are what's holding this team back, and this team will never be a, conference championship level team if their starting best unit sucks. And
can I
year
offer a counter to this? Because just real quick, last year we had Darius playing just horrendous for a billion different reasons, and you had Donovan in the second half playing on one leg, and their net rating just sucked in those games because Donovan sucked, Darius sucked.
It sucked.
Allen was struggling in the beginning.
What was happening?
The year before that, the core four was
December.
absolutely drilling teams, and then the second season, there's injury concerns. Darius sucks. Donovan was injured. I just think I don't think we can say that the starting five. I think they're going to be very
after.
Good.
What happened between those 2 seasons that might have changed things?
Max Strus is the only difference.
No, they got absolutely smoked by the Knicks. The Knicks showed them that, hey, if everyone stands in the paint and nobody guards anybody on the perimeter, they're just going to self-combust. And that's why
they got Max Strus, that you have to guard at least 3 people on the perimeter.
Right, but that's not Max Strus is great. This isn't nothing against Max Strus. These problems aren't Max Strus.
I just think the net rating looked bad last season because Darius was really bad and Donovan sucked for the second half of the season, and it kind of threw it all into whack.
Right. So then,
but I'll let Corey defend his take. I tried to chime in with that.
Yeah. No, it's more also especially my take was more about perspective, because I think while Jackson obviously is making solid points, it's also just public perspective from the fans is that we have an awful bench. They think that we have untalented players. And when you watch the offenses of the past few seasons, like Jackson's saying, it looks stale regardless if the starters are playing or not. It's not that coaching played a huge part in that as well. The injuries of the starters also plays a huge factor into the rating looking so poor at times, but also a common gripe we've always had is that this team doesn't make offensive adjustments. It's kind of just putting its head down and running into a wall 8 times, hoping that by the 9th time a brick falls over so there's a crack in it and they could go through it. That never happened. The offense kind of stayed the same. We never thought there was a new wrinkle whatsoever. Nothing really revolutionized this offense. It was heavy pick and roll, and if pick and roll didn't work, it was kind of like they shrugged, pack up their bags, and went home. And then the role players only can kind of feed off of how well the main offense is operating. So if the main offense isn't working well, how are they going to do well?
Well, but the thing is, one of the things that even if, like, as we've established, all these guys suck, but the way they suck is in a way that allows those core players to kind of operate better. Like, even though Niang, you have problems with Niang, you have to guard him. You have a proper 4-out offense. Even though Caris LeVert is very frustrating, he is an additional ball handler and a better ball handler than Max Strus, even though we've gone over how Max Strus is actually a pretty good ball handler. But, Caris LeVert is better. So, even though they don't, aren't great players, they are really good fits. And that's kind of one of the things that when we talk about like that Knicks series, we talk about like how bad the role players were and stuff, and they were bad. But that wasn't the problem this year. They weren't losing the game, like they weren't losing games of the Magic because it was like, oh, our bench is so bad. It's like, no, you're losing games of the Magic because your starters aren't really like cohesive. And I know there's reasons why, but it's like we have a full year of the Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland thing really not working well. We have a full year of the team being better with Donovan on the floor and Darius off the floor. Like that's not, these are the issues for this team. The bench is not the issue.
No, but especially pertaining to last season, when injuries stack up and the pecking order moves up notches for players, you're also eliminating the depth that you did have. So your bench does functionally get worse with every injury you had. Right. I don't think the Cavs were going into the series with the Magic being like, God, I hope this Morris signing really pays off because it's kind of life or death for us. And that's what it was. We were kind of hoping that whoever was off our scrap heap of our bench was going to have to step up. And I mean, that's just there's not a lot of juice in the lemons that the Cavs were squeezing towards the end of the season. And it kind of just obviously shriveled up by the time we played the Celtics. But I still don't even think if healthy, that would have gone in our favor.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been a little better.
It would have been better, but
it still wouldn't have gone in our favor.
I think if you had Allen and you had Mitchell healthy, I think that's a very different series with how little interior resistance the Celtics had, but that's a conversation for a different day.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and transition to our next topic here, which, kind of already talking about it a little bit, but what is going to define the Cavs season? Corey, I'll let you start with this one.
I think it is the bounce back seasons for certain players. I think this season is defined by if Darius Garland looks similar to that all-star season, doesn't need to hit that peak like I said, but also I feel like a bounce back for Mitchell health-wise is also huge for this team. We don't want to be a quarter of the way through the season and still kind of wondering if that knee injury, while not a bit like necessarily evident through the preseason, but like a quarter through, that knee looks like it's kind of limiting him from doing stuff we've been kind of routinely seeing from him. It's also just a bounce back in terms of like the Jarrett Allen level of aggression we were seeing towards the end of the season. I know ESPN doesn't agree, but the Jarrett Allen did not lose a step after that stretch in the middle of the season. It's just, I think it's something where this team almost needs like a confidence boost. I don't think the talent was ever gone for these players. It's just, they need hopefully this new offense kind of pushes them to heights and mentally changes the way that they're looking at this season, because this team is not far off from being one of the best teams in the East already. So just a few bounce backs from some of the star guys would really do a lot for this team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Go ahead, Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely Evan Mobley. I mean, if Mobley takes a step that Cavs fans are hoping he takes, then this is I think a top 2 team in the East. And if he's kind of the same player he was last year, then you're probably going to be the same team you were last year or close to it. And that's like a team that you're hoping to get out of the first round. So Mobley will define the Cavs until he's like not on the team anymore. Like, I think that's just kind of how it is. This team was built with the idea that Mitchell was the missing piece to a Mobley-led core that's going to take them to the championship level. And if Mobley just kind of stays the same guy he was his rookie year, then that championship level is never going to be reached. So he's going to keep defining the season. And, as much as I like Atkinson and I think he's going to help, Atkinson's alone is not going to make this a championship level team. Mobley's going to have to really develop, and Atkinson's, additions and the ways he's helping improve the offense is what's going to take him over.
Yeah, it's hard to pick any one specific thing that's going to define the season, because obviously it is important that we get bounce back years from DG and, Donovan Mitchell is healthy for the whole year. But I'm going to have to go with Mobley's development as well, because I think you can reasonably assume what you're going to get from Allen, Garland, and Mitchell to varying degrees. But I don't know, am I going to get 15 points and 8 rebounds from Mobley again as in his 4th season, or am I going to see him jump to a 20-plus point per game scorer, 4 or 5 assists per game, perennial defensive player of the year, and legitimate offensive weapon? If he becomes that, then the Cavs, that's really what it comes down to, because now maybe he's even better than that, or maybe he's worse, but how high Mobley climbs, that's going to define the season for me, because he is the player who defines their ultimate ceiling.
That game against the Bulls, I know that the numbers don't say that it was like a phenomenal game. I was just so impressed by the passes that he was making. Yeah. Sorry. The second preseason game against the Bulls, the overtime game. I was so impressed with the way he was attacking and like just getting downhill and then seeing the passes. He was seeing passes that I didn't know he could see, and that's where it's
one he gets downhill, throws like a hook to the opposite corner, and it's insane.
It was a bullet. He threw that with his left hand too,
I think
right?
so, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, like that's insane. So like how many people at his size can make that play? Like there's really not that many. So it's like if he can keep showing he can do things like that, it's like the sky is the limit for this team. But if he's just kind of like, oh, he does that once every 2 weeks, then it's like, then it's, the sky's not the limit.
Yeah. It's the difference between like the second seed and being like the 4 or 5.
Right.
If we're like sitting here in January and we're doing the thing that we've been talking about where it's like, man, if Mobley just kept the level of aggression he does after he shoots the first 3 of the game, that'd be great. Because that's basically what this conversation kind of devolves into. It's like he flashes enough, but at some point it's just, you're going to sound like a spoiled fan being like, I don't care that Mobley is one of the best defenders in the league. If his offense stays where it is, he's not going to change the ceiling of this team whatsoever.
If I will say it will be a disappointing season if Tony has to come on here and do film breakdowns to show that he's like 1 point per game better. Like, you guys don't see this. Last season he shot 76% at the rim. Now he's shooting 81.
Last year he was scoring at a career high rate last year per 36. You got to squint to see it, but he did improve just a little bit. This is what I highs from all across the floor. Free throw percentage jumped.
If Tony is fighting people on that, it's bad.
You can hate it, but facts don't care about your feelings, Jackson.
He's a little more aggressive on those screens. If you take a closer look, he puts his shoulder in a little more.
I agree with what both you guys are saying.
It's like
we need to see that statistical leap from Mobley, a legitimate statistical leap.
We need the eyeball test as well.
Yeah, both of them need to match up.
Yeah, you need like your parents to be able to see the leap.
I need him.
You don't need
20 points per game, and I want to see how many assists he can get to, because I think 4 is a realistic goal. I think 5 might sound crazy, but I think that's also possible.
I think a situation in which he could be like the hockey assist type player too. Just that connective tissue is something that's huge.
He was at 3 last season, right around 3, maybe just under, but
that's not that big of a jump if you're putting the ball in his hands more, because the ball was never really in his hands, and if it was in his hands, it was in the short roll, and that's where the defense wanted the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I think Mobley's development is going to define how far the Cavs go this season. But let's go ahead and get out of here with a few broad predictions for the season. And start off, where do the Cavs finish in the East? I will say I could see them getting as high as 2nd and as low as 5th. I think as long as Boston's healthy, I think they're going to win the conference again. And then really outside of the top 5 or 6 in the East, like again, as long as I can assume reasonable health for the Cavs, I don't see them finishing lower than 5th. Where do you guys stand?
I could see them getting first in the conference. I understand
could,
why
it's
people.
just-
I understand. The thing is,
It's tough.
I think it's. I would almost.
I mean, Boston's
I
beating
wouldn't
the
be
brakes
more
on in New York
surprised.
opening night, so
Yeah,
they're off to a good start.
I mean,
they haven't missed a step.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that after you win a championship, it's really hard to keep up that level of play after Christmas. So I think that's where.
Not to keep interrupting you, very sorry, but usually it is hard after you win a championship. But Brown and Tatum do have reasons to be a little extra motivated. Maybe they were rightfully disrespected this summer, but certainly they're going to take it differently. Okay, I'll stop interrupting.
Maybe they were rightfully disrespected. They were awful in the not Brown. Brown didn't play.
Well, Brown probably should have been on the roster, but it's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
it's okay. That's not the point. That's not the point. Continue your
Celtics. But just saying that there's a reason why since the 2019 Warriors were the last team to get out of the second round of the playoffs after winning a championship. And it's always easy to like sit here and say, oh, the team that just won should keep winning. Like at this time last year, if you asked us, how good are the Nuggets? We'd be like, yeah, the Nuggets are like awesome. Do you know how good Jokic is? He has a team around him that makes sense. Who cares that they've lost? Who did they lose? Like
Bruce Brown.
Yeah, like who cares that they lost Bruce Brown? They'll be fine. They'll keep rolling. And it's like, there were times last year where they were rolling, but then they also ran out of gas in the second round. And it's like that happened the year before. That happened with the Bucks. I don't think, after Giannis won his championship, it was like, this guy is like the 1A superstar. Who is going to stop Giannis? And it's like they never got anywhere close to those heights again. So it's just really hard to keep it going. And it's like the numbers say the Celtics are better positioned to do that than any other team. And this isn't even like Celtics hate. This is just kind of like, this is what's happened the last 5 years. So for the Celtics to break out of that trend, it would be pretty surprising, kind of just with how more even the landscape is. Like there's no 2012, 2013 Heat with LeBron on it. There's no KD and Steph Warriors. Like Tatum and Brown are great, but they're not to that level. So that's where the Jays, yeah. I mean, they're not that like, yeah.
Yeah, and I have a point on that we'll get to later when we talk about contenders. Corey, where do you think the Cavs finish in the East? Give me best case, worst case.
I have best case being second. I kind of disagree on the Celtics point.
Well, you're a Celtics fan, so that's why.
Yeah, born and bred, love the C's.
Literally,
Deuce is my adopted son.
Dog.
Yeah. And then I think worst case for them is sixth. I think the teams that we've mentioned, I kind of consider they're kind of in contention with the Sixers, the Knicks, the Bucks, and the Pacers. I feel like worst case is they're worse than all those teams and fall to sixth. But I think second is honestly, I feel the most confident. I think there's a lot of volatility and moving parts throughout those teams I just mentioned, except for the Pacers, but I don't know if the Pacers are kind of built to compete with that crest yet. But I think the Celtics are kind of set up to do well just because the rest of the league, like I said, has been kind of moving around and their roster is still in place. And even if they're not built to kind of keep this going through the postseason, I think while everyone's figuring stuff out, I wouldn't be surprised if they just keep it rolling for the most part. Maybe they're not going to be my finals favorite, but I think they're at least built to kind of carry the East.
Yeah. And I'd agree with that. So let's move into my second question here. Kind of similar, but how far do we think the Cavs can go in the playoffs? I think Eastern Conference Finals should be the goal. But if it ends in a competitive second round series, I'd be okay with that too. But I would like to see them break through to the conference finals. Corey, how about you?
I agree with the Eastern Conference Finals. I think it kind of all comes down to seeding. Like if their matchup in the second round is like Eastern Conference Finals comparable, like some of the
which it very well might be.
Yeah, you never know with the way the seeding goes. Teams kind of lobby for whatever position they feel is best. You never know if they get the Knicks again in the second round or the Celtics in the second round. Those are the two teams I feel like that are best built to beat them right now.
One thing I do want to say about the Knicks is that there's like one guy from that team that beat the brakes off the Cavs. Like still,
Mitchell Robinson's ready to roll, dude.
They're a very different team, but save it for the contenders and pretenders talk in case you have a take there.
Don't tell
Yeah,
me what
Jackson.
to do. Sorry,
I'm just trying
you
to
have
run
a
it over. So Corey agrees. Jackson, how about you? How far do you think the Cavs go in the playoffs?
I don't think they go to the finals, but I wouldn't be shocked if they went to the finals.
They have a fighter's chance at it.
I think they have a good chance. Maybe not a good chance relative to like the field, which I think the East is probably more wide open than it's ever been. Where like, I could see a team like the Pacers getting hot and going to the finals. I mean, you almost said it last year. You could see. I guess there's a world where the Bucks kind of put it together. Like there's a world where the Sixers put it together. Like I don't think those things are going to happen. But like you can see a lot of different outcomes, and I think the Cavs are one of those. It comes down to Evan Mobley's development. If Evan Mobley looks like the guy against the Bulls and their defense is good, it's like, wow, like, this team could go to the finals. But, if this is the team that they were last year, they could also lose in the first round. So it's like, I think there's a lot of different outcomes to this season, and I don't think many of them would surprise me unless they were a play-in team. They didn't get out of the play-in tournament. So like if they lost in the first round to a good team, I wouldn't be like too surprised.
Yeah. And I agree with that for the most part. So to wrap up our preseason predictions here, I wanted to skip the generic questions of like who wins MVP, who will win the title. I wanted to go kind of a different route. And so let's go over who are the NBA contenders and who do we think are the pretenders. I'll go ahead and start with someone that I think we all agree on. I think the 76ers are frauds for various reasons. And I'll keep it real simple, then let you guys chime in. One, I have zero faith in Paul George and Joel Embiid being healthy for 16 games in the playoffs. Two, even if they are healthy, are both of them going to show up and perform in the playoffs? They both had spotty playoff records. Now, I do think on paper, hypothetically, the fit of Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid is awesome. And if they all are healthy and they all show up, then they could very well win the title. You're just not going to catch me placing my faith in that.
One thing I do want to say about the Sixers is that Paul George was the perfect fit on the Thunder, and he proved that he wasn't the perfect fit on the Thunder. Then he was the perfect fit on the Clippers, and he proved he wasn't the perfect fit on the Clippers. So it's like, why would we believe that an even older, worse version of Paul George that is really only like a spot-up shooter at this point is going to be the missing piece that kind of catapults them over the edge? And that's where I'm like, I don't know. Even if they're fully healthy, I'm really not buying it.
No, I think the way the Sixers kind of hit their ceiling is if Maxey kind of ends up being their best player, because there's going to be stretches in this season. It's almost guaranteed that George and Embiid are going to be out. And Maxey is kind of accustomed, even from last year, of carrying the Sixers team to where they went and kind of took that next step. I kind of think that, I think they're both out already. I think they both have injuries. So Maxey already kind of had good momentum going. I think my biggest issue with this team is it reminds me a lot of the construction of the Suns last year, where they're built around the three players. And then you kind of, in the offseason, you like all their role player signings. They have Eric Gordon, they have Lowry, they have Martin, they have Oubre. Those are all players and Drummond. Those are all players on paper that you think are going to be impact
phenomenal
players.
In 2019.
That's what I was going to. Those are players that you're like, oh man, 2 to 3 years ago, that's a pretty decent team you got there. And I mean, how many times with Eric Gordon being signed do we have to be like, that's a good signing there? And then realize when watching him being like, wow, he does not move at all on the floor whatsoever.
That hasn't been a good signing since like 2015.
And that compounded with the fact that you're dealing with two injury-prone stars, with Embiid also saying he's not playing in back-to-backs, which you didn't have to say it. Like, you just could have been on the injury report not playing. But they're making the road to being a good team in the East harder with every kind of day that passes. And I'm very out. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being a 7 or 6 seed or 8 seed even in the East, just because of the way I think the regular season is going to go. If they're healthy in the postseason, I could maybe see them getting hot just because of those three, but I don't necessarily buy into the fact that they're going to be a 4 or 3 like I'm seeing a lot of places have them.
Yeah, there's just so many ways that the 76ers experiment could go wrong. And I know we all like to talk about, well, what if it all works out? It usually doesn't in the NBA. You're usually not going to have that many variables go your way. You never know, but I'm going to call them frauds for now. I will say I'll go down a couple of the teams that I think are legit. I think Boston's legit. I pick
What a
them as
terrible
my
take.
I think they're going to repeat, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think the NBA is pretty open, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's wrong. I've been a little mixed on the Thunder because I think it's a lot harder to break through from where they were last year to become like an actual champion. But I'll say they're legit because I think their roster construction is just as good as it can get. And I think Shea is legitimately maybe a top 5 player in the NBA. So here's one that I think will be interesting to talk about. I think the Bucks and the Nuggets are still legit contenders because I still believe in superstar power. And that was the point that I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the Knicks, is that like, or even just like, if you look at it, everyone thinks it's going to be like the Celtics, the Thunder, maybe the Knicks or the 76ers winning the chip. And now Joel Embiid is probably a top 5 player when he's healthy. But it's just hard to win a championship when you don't have the best player on the planet in any given postseason. And if I'm looking at who I think is going to be the best player in the playoffs, if healthy, Jokic and Giannis are like maybe 1 and 2. And so I know that they have plenty of issues across the roster, but I'm just not going to count either one of those guys out. I know that the Nuggets ran out of gas last year, but they were up by 20 something points in game 7. Things look potentially different if they manage to hold on to that lead. But any takes on this? Who do you think's legit? Who's a pretender?
Well, one fraud that I want to point out that you didn't point out. We just have to say the Minnesota Timberwolves are about as fraudulent as they come.
Wouldn't say
fraudulent as they
come, but I don't think they're going to win the championship this year.
Frauds. I do think it's your point about the best player. I think that is something that is definitely worth bringing up. But I think in this parity era, that parity era is also with the stars. Like the difference between, it felt like, in 2015, it was like LeBron and Steph. And then, a little under that was Katie. And then there's like a wide gap between the guys who you're talking about after that. And like, as good as Jokic is, he's not to that level at all. The same with Giannis. So I think that's where it becomes a little more of a nuanced conversation where it's like, I don't want to face, like, I would never sign up to face Giannis in a game 7 because you know that he's just going to give you everything and there's nothing you can really do to stop him. But at the same time, you need somebody other than like a Chris Middleton that can't stay on the court. You need somebody other than like Damian Lillard who refuses to fit in with that team.
Hey,
and Doc Rivers
this summer, apparently.
That's great. And
that's huge
news.
And
that's
like
awesome.
And like a coach that doesn't even want to be coaching, he just wants to be playing golf, which if I had that much money, I'd just be doing that too. So it's like,
you need to make time to join Bill Simmons on the Ringer every couple weeks.
They just hired new people and Doc wasn't even on the list.
So that's where I think, like, if we were to talk about teams and something that to really like, that's where I'm kind of leaning more towards like liking a team like the Thunder and liking a team like the Celtics. More, it's just more so. Yeah, I know that makes you happy. With the Celtics, it's just more so. It's just really hard to repeat, and nobody ever does it, anymore. So like, I'm not gonna pick the Celtics to do it if it's just something that we don't see anymore.
If I had to pick a team that wasn't mentioned, I feel like, I guess it's like the NBA Finals hangover of sorts, but I feel like the Mavs still have a decent chance in the Western Conference to do well. I honestly feel more confident in them having postseason success than the Thunder. I think the Thunder's case is more just like, it's all hypothetical with what you feel like their supporting players are going to be for their ceilings. You don't know necessarily what Chet's going to look like when he doesn't have to play center all the time. Jalen Williams might take another leap. Hartenstein being your sole center, while Hartenstein is versatile, is not someone I would want all my chips pushed in on for postseason play. He is a little more injury prone than I think people remember for postseason basketball. But the Mavs, going back to the Mavs, I feel like the Mavs, they have that top 5 player. They have Luka. They kind of upgraded their shooting with adding Clay. I don't think I'm expecting Warriors,
but yeah, he's an upgrade over like, who the hell did they even have out there? Like what's his Derrick Jones Jr.? Yeah, it's an upgrade over him.
Yeah,
So-
the bar is low for Klay to make a serious impact on this team. Defensively, he's gone. So if anyone's thinking that Klay Thompson's that remotely close to 3-and-D level Klay, you're just getting the threes. And he's willing to take them. He has enough players with enough gravity on that floor that it shouldn't be like in Golden State where if Steph wasn't on the floor that everyone was just going to, even though Klay wasn't necessarily sinking him, you still had to respect it kind of thing. His job should be easier than it's ever kind of been for him to set up. And if Klay hits that and if Kyrie stays sane for another season, which is a tall ask, then this team could easily be back in the Western Conference Finals.
Well, that's one of the things is it all comes down to Kyrie. Like, as much as we talk about everybody else, like that team was good because Kyrie was phenomenal. And then when Kyrie decided, like when Kyrie stopped being phenomenal, the team just got absolutely run off the floor against the Celtics. And I think if Kyrie was the version we saw in that Western Conference Finals, I think the Mavericks might have won the championship. So that's where it's like, you know, it all comes back to Kyrie, and that's the scary part in and of itself, where we just don't see, you know, I don't know what you're getting from a 32-year-old Kyrie at this point in his career.
32.
Yeah, with all of his injury, like with his injury history, with his off the court history, like you're just gonna have to. I'm just gonna have to see it before I believe it.
I think that's fair. And listen, to kind of wrap up this episode, I'm just super excited for this NBA season because again, there's a lot of parity right now. It's hard to pick who's going to win the championship.
The Cavs.
And I think that's fun and exciting. The Cavs, we didn't even mention them. The Cavs, of course. Evan Mobley,
frauds.
MVP. Okoro breakout season. We're going to be
pushing now we're talking about frauds.
Listen, we're going to be pushing Cavs agendas all year, and that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. So thank you, as always, for tuning in. And if you're excited for the Cavs season like we are, then go ahead and follow the Junkyard Pod on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We will be going live after the Cavs opening game against Toronto, so make sure you're subscribed on YouTube so you can join us in the chat. Jackson and Corey will be doing the live watch party for that game as well, so follow over on Playback so you can chat with them. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree, go Cavs. Brian, are you making your way up to Canada?